Hey, John, welcome to the Debrief.
Hey, Teddy. Glad to be here.
Yeah, this is going to be fun. For the folks at home watching, this is the Debrief presented by Bright Hire. The Debrief is a series of conversations with founders, executives, and talent thought leaders about hiring and building high-performing teams. I'm your host, Teddy Chestnut, co-founder of Bright Hire, and today I am truly thrilled to welcome our guest, John Vlastelica, founder and CEO of Recruiting Toolbox. Formerly led TA teams at the likes of Expedia and Amazon, where he created the famed and often copied, but I don't know if it was copied well, Bar Raiser program. We'll talk more about that. John, thank you so much for joining me today. Excited to have you on, talk about your career, your approach to hiring, your reflections on interview training, and how to raise the bar. Thanks again for joining.
Love it. This is one of my favorite topics.
We're going to jump right in. You've got 2 decades more of recruiting experience. Again, led recruiting teams of all sizes, from startups to Expedia and Amazon. I'm curious how those experiences built toward you founding Recruiting Toolbox. Tell us about what it is and why you founded it.
Yeah, so Recruiting Toolbox is a consulting and training firm. We're a small but mighty team of former practitioners, so we're all former TA leaders. I started it because I was looking for a firm like ours, and I couldn't find one. I was a TA leader looking to bring someone in to do some training work, and a lot of the training that I found, and including some that I experimented with, was very kind of prescriptive. There's only one way to do it. Here's our secret methodology. It wasn't customized at all to kind of what we were optimizing for, our process, our goals, the kind of specific challenges we were facing. And I thought someone should build a company that does like custom training that starts with some consulting to understand like what the real issues are, and then build training that's scenario based, where people get to practice stuff that they're actually going to use in candidate conversations or recruiter hiring manager conversations or recruiting leader executive conversations. And so that's what we do. We do a ton of hiring manager training, recruiter training, TA leader training.
Very cool. And born of, again, multiple decades of experience leading TA teams. So I'd love to go back and maybe learn a little bit more about the early experiences that were formative for you. Maybe your time at Amazon to start. Like, interested in what your time was like there, what kind of roles you had, and some of the formative experiences in that part of your career.
Yeah, it was interesting. I was 28 years old. I joined this money-losing bookseller downtown Seattle, and really kind of shitty offices with, stained carpet and 3 people per office. I left the comfort of kind of the east side of Seattle, where I felt like I was treated like a king. I got to sit in VP row. I was kind of like an up-and-comer, and then you're just you're thrown into this very early Amazon, and it was one of the most amazing experiences of my life, for sure. Definitely over my head, definitely too young for my role, like pretty much everyone else there. But it was incredible, and it was interesting because you kind of think you're good at your job. When you get hired into a new job, you're like, oh, this is going to be great because I've been doing something just like this. That's why they hired me, right? They asked me those behavioral interview questions. Tell me about a time, and I shared some examples, and then they hire you. And then you get there and you're like, holy shit, this is really different from what I did before. Like, this is hardcore. Like, I thought I hired good talent at the company I worked at right before, that I was there for 5 years. And then I went to Amazon, and it was just clear this was a company that had an appetite for higher hanging fruit, that this was a company whose bar was much higher, whose kind of what good looks like, what they looked for in a person. They spent much more time evaluating raw IQ. I was always the dumbest guy in the room, which looking back was like the best thing ever for my career. But I worked with really smart people who had very high expectations and standards. And one of the best things that happened with Amazon for me was people just expected a lot more out of me. And you either rise to the occasion, like I think I did over my 6 years there, or you don't, and so I was kind of pulled up by really high expectations, starting with Jeff Bezos all the way down to individual hiring managers. It was a really intense experience and amazing. I feel like my second year there, which was 1999, which was just a ridiculous peak of .com craziness, right? I feel like I got 20 years of experience crammed into that 1 year. That's just amazing when you get that kind of opportunity.
What was the scale of the talent acquisition team when you joined Amazon?
We were under 2,000 employees when I joined. I think Amazon is like 1.5 million or something now, but I don't remember what the exact number was. I left in 2005, and I remember thinking, this place is getting big. I'm not sure this is right for me. And it was like, 40,000 people or something, which is, it's just funny, right? Different people at different stages, but it felt big scale to us. We were doubling and doubling and doubling, and it was just very scrappy. And, we did some things extremely well, which I think you might want to talk about. I think we did some things that were like, looking back, I'm like, what were we thinking, But you had a lot of new people hiring new people, right? When you're growing fast and you're in that kind of hockey stick kind of growth, you've just got a lot of new people starting in. You're like, Teddy, welcome to Amazon. You've been here 2 weeks. Hey, go build a 20-person team that can do X. And you're like, and I'm like, hey, welcome. I don't have a recruiter to work with you yet. I'm going to hire someone. Good luck. That's early startup-y kind of feeling, right?
That's amazing. So I love the phrase, an appetite for higher hanging fruit. So clearly Amazon wasn't suffering from a high bar when you joined. But you helped to codify this bar raiser program. What was tell us about it. What was the impetus for it? How did it go from maybe something that was emergent to something formal? We're really curious about the origins of it.
Yeah, so let me kind of set the stage a little bit. It was 1999. Our company was in this kind of get big fast mode. That was literally, our focus was like, how do we grow fast? Like there's an opportunity, there's a window, there's kind of a gold rush going on. We got to go stake our claim and go big. And so we were consciously trying to grow the company really quickly. And as such, we went from hiring, I don't remember exact numbers. I want to say it was something like 80 software engineers the first year I was there, to getting up by the middle of the second year I was there to 80 a month. And that's just a different kind of scale, right? I mean, there's a very different kind of scale. So when you go from kind of 80 a year to 80 a month, there's just a lot of things that you start to look at, like how do we maintain quality? Like 80 a year, we made sure that JJ and Jeff and Neil and Ellen were like always involved in hiring decisions. They could be close to it. But now they're moving up to leaders of leaders, and they're not as involved. And some of the new leaders are new and untested at hiring against our bar. And so one of the things we were trying to solve for and trying to figure out a way to kind of do it the Amazon way was, how do we make sure that we embed this high bar in every hiring decision we make? And so step one was, before you raise the bar, you have to define the bar. So a lot of my early work was defining kind of what good looks like. I was leading all of technical recruiting, so my focus was primarily software engineers. So what makes a great software engineer? And that's technical skills and achievements, plus that's some soft skills and kind of what makes someone a good kind of job match for the kind of unique craziness that was Amazon. So we defined that, including going off on some tangents like, what is smart? No, I mean, like, when someone says smart, like, what is that really? Because like a lot of companies, when you're young, you use proxies, right? You use pedigree or something from the school or something like that. So anyway, so step one was kind of define the bar. And then step two was, all right, what's the mechanism we can put in place to make sure that we make quality hiring decisions? When I built Amazon's interview training, I didn't call it behavioral interviewing. I called it making great hiring decisions, because that's really what I was trying to teach. And we were trying to embed throughout the org and the culture is, how do we make sure we're making quality hiring decisions? And a quality hiring decision is avoiding false negatives and false positives. It's not just the false positive, like we made a bad hire, but it's also like, I don't want to miss out on someone who would have been good because of some bias or some poor interviewing practices. So we identified to start 20 people that we just said, these are bar raisers. These are people that like, if JJ says Teddy's good, Teddy's good, right? Now, how do we scale JJ? Well, we can't necessarily have JJ be the hiring manager for every role. And we don't even want JJ always to be kind of her own bar raiser, but JJ should be a bar raiser on behalf of the company. And she should have a kind of company lens, like a long-term lens on the hire. So we identified 20 people and we're like, congratulations, you're amazing. In addition to your 60-hour work week, in addition to the hires for your own team, we want you to be available as kind of an expert interviewer and expert debrief facilitator, so an expert hiring decision facilitator for some other teams. And so we built the bar raiser program so that no offer could go out, no interview would get scheduled even if there wasn't an assigned bar raiser who was not the hiring manager and didn't report to the hiring manager. So you could have an independent kind of, still a company employee, not a recruiter, not an HR person, no one with an incentive to get a butt in the seat. No one is thinking like, I got to get this rec filled. Instead, someone is thinking, is this a good long-term hire for the company? And we embedded those initially 20 people into every single interview for all software engineers. And eventually the program scaled within tech. And then we decentralized technology, and eventually it scaled across all roles. I don't think Amazon uses it for hourly roles, certainly in warehouses and such, but it scaled across, when we launched into Europe and other areas, it just became kind of the Amazon way. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I'm really curious, the first 20 that you picked on the spectrum of gut feel to science, on like, these are the 20 people and this is why. Where was the decision making? What was the criteria?
Yeah, these were people that had a track record of hiring great talent, so we could literally point to people that they hired as hiring managers themselves. Some of them were not managers, some of them were individual contributors. But just as importantly, they were smart, respected engineers whose opinion was valued. If they spoke up in a room on any topic, if they asked a question, it was always a great question. So they were well respected by peers, because you remember, you might be an individual contributor software engineer who's a bar raiser working with a director who's trying to hire someone, and you don't report to that person, and you're not the same level as them. You have veto power. You can say, no, this is not a good hire for the company. So the other thing that was really important to look for is, do they have backbone? Can they not just say no in the face of a bunch of yeses, but can they actually influence the group to understand the no? Can they challenge the group's maybe assumptions, or challenge their lack of evidence that says this person's good when in reality they're not going to be good for the company? So it was a lot of kind of just smart, capable, respected, good track record, but also really good at kind of saying no in the face of a bunch of peer pressure to say yes.
When I've spoken with talent acquisition leaders about trying to replicate the bar raiser program, it's usually in the context of quality, right? We want to make sure that we bring a different quality of individual into the team. But you talked about the bar raiser program being implemented at a time when you were going from 80 a year to 80 a month. So like, what element enabled you to institute this and go 10 times faster, 12 times faster than you were doing before?
It wasn't, so I would say the process itself wasn't faster because of bar raisers. In fact, it introduces a constraint, right? You have a bigger capacity constraint, because the people we were picking as bar raisers, even when we expanded beyond 20, these were some of the busiest people in the company.
It's like these are people coordinator's nightmare.
Yeah, it's a nightmare. It's a nightmare if you're scheduling, right? And there was no AI, there was no tool that you could look across, all the different calendar. I mean, even rooms. I mean, people didn't have private offices usually, so where are you going to even enter? I mean, this was just all the fun of kind of scaling. What I found though is that we were faster in the sense that we were extremely decisive. Like there was not multiple rounds. We actually kind of aligned on kind of a no more than 5 people should be part of the interview process. Here's what we do if 2 teams are interested. We kind of had some rules of engagement that kind of led to what are we optimizing for. And speed isn't what we were optimizing for, Teddy. We were optimizing for quality. So we had very much had a company philosophy. It's better to leave this job open than it is to hire someone who doesn't meet the bar or raise the bar.
Yep.
And that was one of the questions we asked ourselves, when we were making hiring decisions was, is this person a superstar along at least one dimension? And, is this person a good hire? Is this someone I could learn from? Is this someone that can scale with the company? So we were more quality than speed focused, but we were trying to do quality at scale. Yep. And there's really 2 ways we could have gone. I mean, a lot of people implement hiring committees or some version like that. Google has done that. We as consultants helped Marissa Meyer put that in place when she went from Google to Yahoo. We were hired at Yahoo to do some work around training and defining the bar and some process. And hiring committees were just not Amazon culture. We wanted to embed a bar. We wanted more of a decentralized model where the bar is kind of embedded at the hiring team level. And we saw the bar raiser as a teacher and a coach as much as the person who has veto power. I mean, if you view it as the person that's going to tell you who you can and can't hire, why even have the other interviewers? Just have the bar raiser interview on behalf of the company. But we viewed it as, hey, we want to actually scale up bar raisers, and bar raisers make other bar raisers. And so bar raisers are actually in the room, because these were live debrief, conversations, sometimes 30, 60 minutes, reviewing very detailed feedback and having rich, deep conversations. You were kind of, as the bar raiser, interviewing the interviewers to see, did they do a good job of evaluating the candidate and then facilitating a decision. So we weren't as focused on like, how do we scale, or how do we just go faster? It was kind of like, how do we scale quality? And this is the mechanism we chose. And so we had to very quickly go from 20 to 40 to 100 to, bigger as we went. But if someone wasn't a bar raiser, they weren't just made one because they were a VP, just because they worked at Google or Microsoft or some other company where we respected their technical bar. You didn't just get to be a bar raiser. You had to actually like earn a bar raiser role.
Fascinating. You referenced some companies committee, some companies at bar raiser, and you started with this idea of like, you started Recruiting Toolbox because you wanted bespoke, customized training to meet the organization's needs. So you've taken your experience, you've gone to other companies, Pepsi, Disney, Adidas, Bloomberg, helped them build effective hiring programs.
Yeah.
Is there anything consistent across all of them, like advice that you give to like any organization or in terms of like hiring and building teams that isn't bespoke, that is like foundational?
Yeah, some of this implies that you're going to do some kind of bespoke custom work, but I will say a few of the big things that stand out is your executive team has to be a champion of your high hiring bar. And the executive team has to be a champion of your diversity first, your skills first, we need to widen the aperture and move away from pedigree. That kind of stuff needs to be, people need to look up and see that your executives are supporting that and championing that. I think interview training and kind of defining the bar work sometimes is passed to an L&D organization, which is typically underfunded, or a junior mid-level person on the team is like a side project. I think it's incredibly strategic work, and you need to have a plan when you launch it, just like when you launch a product. It needs to have branding, it needs to have a why behind it. You need to have, like we had Adidas, Gymshark, Autodesk, 3 of the companies we've done some custom interview training for. Each one of them, we had their CEO record a video to kind of start the training. And in some companies, I forgot the name of the company, but one of the consultants on my team, he was just working, and the CEO actually, came to the training and stayed and talked and engaged and said, like, hiring top talent isn't just, a general priority. It is everything, and this is the role you all play in making sure we build a great company. And so I think having some kind of branding around that. And then the thing that I think is important around the bespoke content is you want your training to be prescriptive. If you're just teaching generic behavioral interviewing and legal do's and don'ts and unconscious bias, it's not really teaching people how to hire the Amazon way or the Yahoo way or the Starbucks way or PepsiCo way. You want to teach people how to hire for your company's bar, and that includes, your bar includes some principles. How you hire impacts who you hire. So you want to get aligned on the how you hire part. And there's decisions you make, how many people you have on the interview team, the weighting of kind of soft skills and hard skills, whether or not you consider certain skills trainable, transferable, or whether they're truly must-haves. Like some of the stuff you should have a federal point of view on, a company-wide point of view on. And that's the work we do before we do training. And if we're not being hired to do training, we recommend our clients, like, hey, you should go and define your company kind of point of view on a bunch of things, so that when people come into the training, even if they've been an experienced hiring manager or interviewer, they're learning your process around this. So we just did this work for LinkedIn, for example. We built their License to Hire program. And a big part of License to Hire, which was a hiring manager certification program, they already had interview training, was teaching hiring managers how to hire the LinkedIn way. In a company that's very diversity forward, very skills forward, they're kind of leading the way in some of these areas. And so even though some of these people were quite experienced, it still made sense for them to go through, some kind of, LinkedIn specific training. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. I'd love to actually pull on this thread a little bit. When we think about interview or interviewer training, we often think relatively narrowly about the conversation that an interviewer has with a candidate and what should or shouldn't happen in that conversation.
Right.
But my sense is you define it much more broadly, more around like how we hire, and that there are other pillars and elements that you actually want to make sure we get right. And I think about every talent acquisition leader, listening to this, who's thinking, I got to take control of my hiring process. Like, if I don't, then I'm like leaving my candidates to chance, right? And I'm at the mercy of every functional leader and how they feel like they made it up.
Exactly.
So what are the elements in your mind, the pillars of a hiring practice that a TA leader needs to ensure that she or he really develops a federal point of view on or nails, and then translates into policy training, collateral process?
I think about this in kind of two ways. If you picture kind of a classic funnel, right? I kind of think about the primary work as kind of pre-funnel, defining what good looks like, defining expectations of a hiring manager, even kind of just culturally, like, are we going to have written feedback? Are we going to have live debrief sessions? Like, are we going to use a tool like BrightHire to kind of come in and look at what we're doing and give people feedback? Like just some general kind of pre-funnel that's not rec specific. And then thinking about mid-funnel, I think a lot about, how do you make sure you have mechanisms to align your interviewing team? I don't mean align the company, that you need to do that. That's pre-funnel. Like, what does good look like? What's our competency model? What's our philosophy on kind of weighting technical skills versus soft skills? What's trainable? What's not? What makes someone senior versus, junior, mid? That stuff needs to be done all kind of pre-funnel. But when you get into the actual interviewing process, you got to look at candidate experience, because your pass-through rates and conversion will look very different if you have a bad versus a good candidate experience. Obviously, that'll impact accepted offers. You want to look at mechanisms for both aligning your specific interviewing team. So what is this hiring manager looking for? What is the company looking for? But then also make sure you have mechanisms to assign focus areas that are not generic, like, Teddy, you focus on culture fit and I'll do technical skills. Like that is 30,000 feet. We got to get very, stop saying culture fit, what behaviors, what competencies, technical skills, what specifically are we evaluating that's a deal breaker, or that allows us to understand if this person is junior, mid, senior based on how they do. And then you want to have a really strong decision-making process that you are teaching. And for some companies, that's rating scales, like rubric kind of stuff with live conversations. Some companies, it's like Amazon. We had a culture of written feedback. Kind of famously, Amazon is a writing culture. And so, I remember Jeff Bezos coming into a hiring meeting, and we spent the first 20 minutes reading pages and pages of written feedback, detailed reference checks. I mean, we all just sat in a room reading in front of each other for like 20 minutes, and then we had a conversation. That kind of discipline is not typical. It is not common. And so one of the big decisions when you're thinking about building training or your hiring practices is, what is the mechanism to make sure we're making quality hiring decisions? And for some of our clients, like for Adidas, we trained their recruiters to be that kind of facilitator, and some people out of their employee resource groups that were going to be kind of champions of this fair, equitable process. Other clients, we've trained someone more to be a bar raiser. Some companies, it's an HR BP, or it's the hiring manager's manager that kind of plays that bar raiser or facilitator role. Sometimes it's just the hiring manager. But having a point of view on how we make decisions, how we make trade-offs, that kind of stuff is usually missing. It's usually, to your point, all right, you're sitting across from a candidate. Here's the candidate, here's you, and what questions are you going to ask? And then write them down in this form and submit this form. And it's not about the form, and it's not just about, like, you can teach someone behavioral interviewing techniques in 10 minutes. It's not hard to teach someone how to ask a tell me about a time question. The key is, what are they listening for? What trade-offs are we going to make? How do we coordinate so that you and I aren't asking the same stuff? It's that kind of process that we get into in the details. And there's not just one best practice, because some clients are optimizing for, they've widened the aperture and they're doing more skills-based and they're moving into different territory. And some are very focused on just speed. Like we have a client right now that has, 1,900 openings in one of their areas, and they do high volume hourly hiring. And they're not going to do 5-person interview teams with focused areas and a formal debrief. Like, that's just not how they're going to hire for those kinds of roles, right?
You said something earlier in the conversation around the job of an interview process, if you're trying to get it right, is to avoid both false positives and false negatives.
Yeah.
Most people, when they think about bar raiser program or quality of hire, are really thinking about the false positives. I don't want to make a mistake.
Yeah.
Most new hiring managers are terrified of making a mistake.
Totally.
And when we think about opening the aperture, equitable hiring, building diverse teams, often it's the false negatives that are much more important for us to actually organize around and ensure that we avoid. how have the most successful teams that you've worked with talked about the false negatives and operationalized a process to try to avoid them?
Yeah, it's kind of hard. I mean, we do some work in our license to hire hiring manager training. We do an exercise in the first 30 minutes where we talk about, in small groups, what are the root issues that cause false negatives? Because it's, false positives we get into as well, but false negatives is usually new for experienced hiring managers. To your point, that's not what they're thinking about. And certainly new managers are definitely not thinking about that. They just don't want to get in trouble, right? Which I can relate to. So a few things. We usually frame it less around like diversity, not because diversity isn't maybe one of our goals, it might be, but we talk about false negatives more and missing out on good talent. We try and frame it around FOMO. Like, who are you missing out on because you have too many interviewers involved and you require consensus? Like, one of the guaranteed ways to increase the number of false negative hiring decisions, which you'd never want to do, is to get way too many people involved and require consensus. Because you can't get 6 people to agree on where we're going to go for lunch today. You certainly aren't going to get 6 people that aren't aligned on what good looks like to agree on a hire, probably, right? And so what happens is, whether you say this explicitly or not, if we're a consensus culture, that kind of means everybody has veto power. And if everybody has veto power and someone isn't a good interviewer or isn't aligned on what good looks like, we're going to crank up the number of false negatives in a big way. So one of the things we look at as kind of a root issue is how many interviewers, do you have a mechanism for aligning people on what good looks like? And then at the decision, that's at the front end, and then at the decision-making point, not just how many and do we have the right type of interviewers, but when we're making a decision, is someone there championing the candidate? If the candidate's an obvious no, it's an obvious no. But is someone championing the candidate in the face of someone who says, yeah, I just got the feeling that, I don't know, I just can't picture Teddy standing up to an executive and just pushing back. And someone should say, did you get evidence? Did you ask questions to understand whether Teddy has experience pushing back on executives? No, but I just,
I just kind of feel it.
Shook my hand. He just didn't have the firmest handshake, and he didn't make eye contact in this one part, and I just felt like he was making himself kind of small in some conversations, and so I just don't think he's a very confident guy. Someone has to call bullshit on that, right? And not because it's not true. That may be true. It's an and, not an or. It may be that all those things are true, and it turns out he's not good at executive pushback. But if we're not pushing on that, defining what executive presence, executive kind of influence looks like, and we're letting people, like, that's ripe for false negatives. You're going to get tons of false negatives. And that stuff makes me, as you can tell, I'm getting all fired up, but that stuff really frustrates me because that means fat funnels, right? I mean, when I think about now my job, my historic job as a recruiting leader, that means we're talking to way more candidates than we should be talking to. It means we've got, we're not making decisions, probably if we're making decisions fast as possible, we're making bad decisions fast, but often people, hey Teddy, can you keep these 3 people warm while we talk to some more people? And then you know what that's like for candidate experience. It's just, it pisses me off because it's very few companies are actually thinking about avoiding false negatives. And I want to raise that in our industry. And I've written a little bit about this on the LinkedIn talent blog, but I think we need to reframe a lot of our work around, who are we excluding? Who are we missing out on?
It's better for candidates. We like to say that the easiest way to avoid the headaches of coordination and scheduling is just to not have to schedule another interview. Right. If you can get that candidate through and not have to go through the whole process again, great. I don't have that problem. You mentioned the kind of the inverse correlation between number of interviews and likelihood to get hired. We actually ran data on this and saw that exactly. Like
Tell me.
As you increase the number of interviews from 4 to 5 to 6, literally the share of candidates that get hired goes down. It's like a perfect inverse correlation. We also have found, to your point around kind of the need to gut check a no, maybe a soft no that might otherwise have veto power. When folks go back and review the interviews, like on Bright Hire, those candidates are more likely to get hired. We're more likely to change our mind and say, oh no, you were a no, but that was coachable, or you actually didn't really cover that in a lot of depth, and so now we're feeling confident moving folks forward. Again, just narrowing the funnel and giving candidates the right opportunity. It's a really interesting concept.
Your co-founder shared Bright Hire with my team at our retreat, and that was one of the things that really our team lit up. My team, we train thousands and thousands of hiring managers and interviewers every year, and our online training's been used by Cisco certified like 30, 40,000 hiring managers with our training. So we do a lot of this, and we're always kind of curious because as consultants, as opposed to being the VP of TA or the head of TA, as consultants, you kind of hope that the stuff you do lands and it sticks and people are using it and whatever. And then, how do you actually measure a false negative? How do you know that you missed out on someone good? Like, it's hard to do that at scale. You can maybe look at where they went and maybe say, hey, if they're willing to if they went to Google, maybe we missed out. I mean, Google has a high bar. Why would Google hire them? That kind of thing. But one of the things I really appreciated was the ability to go back and look at feedback in Bright Hire and see, like, is this a hard no, or is this a no based on evidence, or is this a no based on gut feel? And then is it coachable? Is it trainable? Could we develop them if they have a gap? Not all candidates are going to be 10 out of 10. And I would even argue that, do you even want a candidate who's 10 out of 10? Because what's in it for them? I mean, if you're truly hit the ground running candidate, like if they have all the things, why would they make a move? There better be some gaps, and you're going to use those gaps to sell them and say, Teddy, I remember when Expedia was recruiting me for the head of TA job, I was like, I haven't done a lot of stuff on the ground outside the United States and Canada. Like, I just haven't done that much. I've never owned reporting relationships in Europe and Asia. And they said, well, we know, but that's one of the reasons you should take this job, is because we're going to send you to Europe. You're going to have people in Asia and Europe that and I was like, that was a really cool framing for that. That's different than, sorry, you're not going to get the job. You don't have X. It's like, good news. We have this thing to dangle in front of you, candidate, because you don't have X. We can offer you X. We know you're going to be really excited and engaged in the job.
I love that. We talked about like fat funnels and kind of streamlined funnels. And you gave a great talk at Unleash several months ago on recruiting metrics. Like, what should TA leaders measure? What should we be measuring that we maybe aren't measuring? I'm curious where you land on that. Like, if you were to think about the work that you do with teams to improve the quality and the speed and efficiency of the hiring process, what metrics do you advise that your teams that you work with should be measuring? And what are metrics that most don't start with but really should have in the kind of their toolkit?
Yeah, I'll tell you, I mean, I could talk about this for a long time, but I'll give you my kind of short, some strong opinion stuff, because strong opinion kind of sells, right? We'll talk about my strong opinion stuff, not the generic stuff. Here's the thing. I mean, historically, speed has been the love language of hiring managers. Historically, the systems we've had in talent acquisition are pretty good at reporting time to fill. And that's one of those things that I feel like, because it's easy to report on, not always accurate, but easy to report on, because speed is the love language, we really over-index on time to fill as a profession, as an industry, as industry or profession in TA. And I get frustrated by that, especially because it's not very actionable to know that my average time to fill across a big company, even a startup with 100 hires, is like 58 days, and that's up from 54 days 6 months ago. Like, I don't know what to do with that. So one of the things that we do, we recommend our clients look at conversion metrics or funnel metrics, and side by side look at time and stage. So look at how many people are going phone screen, interview, offer, hire. Look at those conversion numbers, and then look at time and stage in those two. And there's often quite a correlation between time and stage being long and conversion being poor. So fatter funnel because more time and stage. So breaking time down into kind of the components, how much time are candidates spending, or are we spending, is this rec spending in this stage, can provide much more insight, especially if you break it down at the department or geography or leader level. And then there's a metric that doesn't exist, but that I would love to see, which is time to alignment. It's that idea of, like, from the time the rec is opened, how long did it take for us to get calibrated and aligned as a team? I mean, certainly me, recruiter, you hiring manager, Teddy, but also you hiring manager and your team. Like, how long did it take for us to get aligned on what we're actually looking for? And sometimes that only happens after you've done phone screens, brought in 3 candidates, and then you're like, now I know what I'm looking for.
The classic, I don't know what I'm looking for until I've seen it.
Exactly. And so I'm like, how do you shorten time to alignment? Because once you're aligned, your sourcing can be so much better on target. Your screens as a recruiter is going to be more effective. The hiring manager screen, the way you prep your interviewers, the focus areas you use, what criteria you use to make a decision. You're not going to evaluate 100% of a candidate you've got to prioritize. You have limited time. Even if you do a 4 or 5 hour process, that's still not enough time for some companies to go deep into all the areas, right? So what are you going to prioritize? The sooner we align on what good looks like, recruiter, hiring manager, interviewing team, the skinnier the funnel is going to get.
I would love to probe into that because it's a cool metric and it's something that we try to actually help teams optimize. What do you think are the signals of I've gone from misalignment to alignment? Like what would be happening that you would point to and say like, cool, yes, we have hit that magic moment where, my recruiter and my hiring manager are aligned on this. Even just to start there, forget the interviewers, just like those two people, those two stakeholders. Okay, we're aligned. Like, how do you know?
Yeah, you've heard of this term pre-closing, right? I mean, you've worked in sales, right? To pre-close a customer is, hey, if I were to offer you this deal at this price, would you sign, kind of thing, right? And recruiters do that with candidates all the time. If I were to offer you this job at this salary, would you accept? And it's kind of a pre-offer kind of thing.
Right.
I think we need to do the same thing with the hiring manager on what we're looking for. So Teddy, if I found you someone who's got this kind of achievements, who's strong in these skills, who knows this, and this, who's willing to work for this salary, who's interested in this kind of work, is motivated by this kind of work, is that the kind of person you would hire? And I want to make sure that I'm feeding back to the hiring manager what I heard so that the hiring manager doesn't just go, yeah, but also it'd be cool if they spoke multiple languages. Okay, wait a minute, what? Because why would they need to speak multiple languages? Well, because that, and then my ideal candidate would also have an MBA. Why do they need and so you kind of tie it back to kind of the work they're going to do. And it's not that the hiring manager can't want some of those things. I just want to get to the point where I at least understand what's in her mind. And that I am like, okay, we are connected. Now, after that, we need to have the reality check conversation.
Right.
So I think we're aligned on what you say you want. Now let's talk about the reality of what's going on in the market and bringing market insights, talent availability, compensation realities, remote work, relocation, immigration kind of realities. Let's bring that in so then we can be very focused on must-haves and deal breakers and that. So for me, the signal a little bit is I feed back what I heard you say as a recruiter. I'm being a good talent advisor by kind of, feeding this back to you. And then once you and I are nodding our heads and we're calibrated and aligned, I might be showing you some sample profiles or resumes, CVs, and say, hey, if we had someone that had the top half of this guy and the bottom half of that guy, that's what you're looking for. Yeah. And so I'm using that as a mechanism to get us further aligned. And then, of course, the real proof comes when I submit my candidates and I present my first slate of 3 or 4 candidates to you to review. I want to get to the point where you're like, these are 100% perfect, or not perfect. These are 100% people I'd want to talk to based on our conversations. Let's get them scheduled. That's the signal that we're on target. And I actually had a recruiter at Expedia who's amazing named Katie. And Katie got so aligned with her. She led all of our marketing recruitment at Expedia. And Expedia was the biggest spender on pay-per-click ads in the world. Travel is the biggest category. So to be a marketer at Expedia, you got to play with lots of money and do lots of stuff, right? So she's hiring for the marketing organization, and she got so good at this that she would literally, after this kickoff meeting with the hiring manager, after they were calibrated, if she found a good candidate, she just scheduled it directly on your calendar as the hiring manager, Teddy. There was no let me show you these people. It's like, Teddy, you're going to talk to Julie, you're going to talk to Kaiten on Tuesday at 3 and 4 o'clock. These are people you need to speak with. And there was that trust and calibration. That's another signal that you've kind of arrived. Does that make sense?
It sounds like you do great intake with a real point of view.
Yeah.
And I love the framing, or actually pre-closing the hiring manager on the candidate. If I got you this candidate, would you say yes?
Yeah.
And then the test is I give you that candidate. If you say no, then you were lying.
Right. Something changed.
And that's okay. That's okay. Now it's like, let's unpack that and figure out why. Right, let's recalibrate. But it sounds like you get out of the intake, you get a first slate of candidates, and some very high percentage of those candidates should meet the bar and move from hiring manager screen into the on-site. And that's how we know that we're at.
That's how we know.
Time to calibration.
Yeah.
Really fascinating. When that doesn't happen, what's typically going wrong?
I think one of the challenges for a lot of recruiters, especially in lean TA teams, is you really don't have enough time to learn about the job. Like, so I don't, by the way, I don't call it an intake. I hate that term. Intake sounds very customer
It just feels like
servicey.
I'm an order taker.
Yeah, my wife works in urgent care. You meet with her first. She takes your blood pressure. She does the intake. That's an intake.
Right.
That's not what we're doing here. We're doing something that's more partnering and strategic, I hope. So I call it a kickoff meeting or a strategy meeting. But in that meeting, one of the things that I see as a problem is if you don't understand the work very well, then you're too dependent on the hiring manager and the job description just throwing out keywords, company names, university names, job titles.
Yep.
You're kind of stuck in that Boolean mode where you're just thinking about this and that and that and that, and you end up with just this kind of big, virtual or real string you're going to go plug in to try and find candidates. And what I want to see happen there is that the work so well that you can actually influence the hiring manager to widen their aperture, to consider candidates from a different industry, a different geography, a different, maybe they're called something else at other companies. Like the job title is, I know one of the things we had a real challenge with, we had these program managers at Amazon, but we called them technical program managers. And that was kind of new. And so a lot of people that were program managers could have been someone like me with a non-technical like business background, with more of a whatever. And then they would show up and interview at Amazon, and we're asking them like maybe not hardcore coding questions, but certainly design questions and kind of software practice questions. And you can just see they're just like, this is a totally different job. Like, this is not what I do at Microsoft. This is really different. And that was one of our challenges, is we were not aligned kind of at the big picture level on, meaning recruiting, wasn't aligned on what we were really looking for, because my team was still sending program managers, and what we really needed to find was kind of like, managers of software engineering that wanted to do more high level IC strategic program level work without managing engineers necessarily, but had that kind of credibility and background to bring to this kind of leading a major kind of, project or product kind of thing. And so that's the kind of stuff that I think if we don't know the work very well, we're going to have a really hard time in that meeting, influencing, changing minds, offering alternatives. We're just kind of stuck in that order taker, not talent advisor mode.
Yep. It's also one of the challenges around like tech-enabled sourcing, right? Program manager, great fit, put them in the pipeline. Right now, we're just creating more work to screen that out, as opposed to
exactly.
intelligence around what the job is.
And that's that pre-funnel work I talked about that's so important. Like, we have to get aligned early on that. The time to get alignment is not at the interview stage. Like, you have a fat funnel going on. If that's what you're using to get calibrated and aligned, is let's bring 4 or 5 people in and see what we think. Like, that's not the way you scale a high bar. I mean, companies with high bars don't do that.
I'm curious your take on this. We're talking about alignment in the process of saying, in that kickoff meeting, what's really important. There's some interesting behavioral economics around the number of inputs that somebody can consider when making a decision. So they did some work around like buying cars, and they gave one group of people 12 criteria about the car to choose from, engine size and number of cup holders and horsepower and number of doors, all that. And then they gave another group like 4 criteria. Yeah. And they basically measured happiness with the decision afterward, and found that the people who had fewer criteria to decide around made better decisions. They were happier with those decisions afterwards. Yeah. Because, the number of cup holders maybe has very little bearing compared to the size of the engine or the number of doors, but we weight them the same. Yeah. So when you think about a recruiter running a kickoff meeting, or a hiring manager thinking about defining the criteria for the role, do you have a rubric in mind, or a framework in mind of like skills, competencies, experiences, like how many should we be using? What should that list look like? Like how long, how short, how to structure it? Do you have like best practices around that?
Yeah, it's kind of hard, because it really does depend on, like, if you have really crappy onboarding and training, you might need more people that are hit the ground running, that have more of the must-haves. If you have, Dan Shapiro at LinkedIn, who I think you've interviewed on this on the debrief before, he wrote an article that I love that was around, move from hit the ground running to hit the ground learning. And that sounds great if you have resources in place. Like, if you have good onboarding, training, and you have mentors, and you have people on the team that can coach and help ramp. But if you don't, you're kind of screwed a bit, because then you're potentially going to get sucked into a longer list of must-have requirements. My job as a recruiter in that kickoff meeting is to separate signal from noise, right? I want more signal, less noise. And I never ask hiring managers, like, what is your ideal candidate profile? Like that you don't want to say ideal. I mean, you're setting yourself and our whole profession up for failure when you do that. You are suggesting there is one ideal candidate profile, one narrow profile, which limits the pool, which certainly can impact diversity in a negative way too, but also impacts speed and quality. Like you're too narrowly defining quality. So I've read similar research from people that go into restaurants with like a giant menu, like in the U.S. I don't know if it's global, but in the U.S. we have like the Cheesecake Factory. Have you ever eaten at a cheesecake?
7 pages of
maybe 20 pages. I've never seen a menu that big, right? And people are potentially, the paradox of choice is, you think more choices make people happy, and it doesn't. Fewer choices is sometimes, better. So anyway, I hear you, and I think I agree with you. Fewer is generally better, but it's not. I mean, that's kind of a philosophy. The reality, which is the world I like to live in, is like the reality is this, do we need to hit the ground running? Because maybe for this role, we need a longer must-have list, because maybe, for example, when you're making a hire, you're not just putting a bum in a seat. You should be thinking, hey, what does this existing hiring manager's team look like? What does she have? Will this hire complement the team? And maybe we have a bunch of junior program managers without a lot of technical expertise. And so now we want to hire a senior PM with real deep technical expertise, which is not what we've hired before.
Right.
This is new, and it really is a must-have requirement, because she's trying to reshape her team. She's trying to raise the bar on kind of technical competence on her team, and she needs a leader mentor on the team to do that. And so I'm not the kind of guy who says, push back when hiring managers are asking for too much. Understand when they're asking for too much. Why? Get the context. Why did someone need that to be successful? In those why conversations, you might uncover that this is a bullshit reason. Like, this is stupid. In fact, I'll tell you just a quick funny story. I use this example, but there was a TA leader, this is about 10 years ago now, there's a TA leader asking me if I had leads for some recruiters for his team. And I was like, okay, what are you looking for? And, you would sometimes send a sourcer, more senior executive university. You might have someone that's doing just active hourly kind of hiring versus, more strategic outbound stuff. I'm expecting to hear stuff like that. No, his response was, John, they need to have experience with JobVite 10.4.3, because we're just moving to that. We're just moving to that ATS right now, and it's an upgrade. And I really want to make sure they have. And I'm making up those numbers because I don't remember the numbers, but 10.4. And I remember, like, what the are you seriously telling me that, like, when you're describing your quote ideal candidate, not just that they have, who cares that they even know JobVite, but you specifically want to make sure, and so that is the kind of ridiculousness that 100% I would push back on as a recruiter inside a kickoff conversation. If someone is saying like, ooh, we're more of a Mac shop than a PC. So I'm like, what the, but people have those level of must-haves, and we have to shut that shit down for sure. But the other stuff, I want to understand it better before I get judgy, before I push back, because maybe it really is a true need. And then the question is just weighting. Not everything is weighted the same. And we sometimes give power to the poor debrief facilitator and let them suggest that soft skills and hard skills are equally weighted, or within the hard skills or technical skills, all 5 are equally weighted. That's typically not the case. And that's that pre-funnel work I talked about. We have to get better at kind of understanding pre-funnel, like, what is the weighting of this stuff? So not just, is this a deal breaker, yes or no, but even within some of the must-haves or really important haves, are like, let's stack rank these, and what is trainable, or what can we develop, which you mentioned.
It's almost like one of the most important skills in talent acquisition is just facilitation. I might not know the answers to those things, but I need to force the CTO or the VP of engineering or the hiring through a facilitated conversation to come to clarity on the stack rank and the weightings and the trade-offs, so that then we can go execute on this plan really well.
That's what we teach in our License to Hire program, our Predicting Success interview training, our Talent Advisor recruiter training is, that getting really clear on that stuff early, and being curious. Like, if you're the recruiter, really being genuinely curious about the work and what the person's going to do, and curious why. Teddy, you're telling me this is a must-have and this is a nice-to-have. Like, why is that? Like, really getting curious about that stuff. We do focus groups with thousands and thousands of hiring managers and execs every year. It's part of our project. And we do surveys and we ask them questions. And that is one of the biggest frustrations and requests is, I want my recruiter to know the work, know the job better. I don't want just a keyword copy paste of the old job description. Like, I'm happy to update it, but I need some help, and I want to I don't know, facilitator, or at least I want someone that is like bringing their expertise to the conversation. I want to be led a little more. Now, if you suck, they're not going to let you lead them. But if you know your craft, if you're good at your job, a lot of hiring managers actually want more leadership, more insights, more recommendations from us. They don't want the order taker thing. So you might say, my hiring manager treats me like an order taker. I almost guarantee you they don't want that. They would rather have you show up as a leader, as an expert, as the talent advisor. But
as long as you know what you're talking about.
Yeah, you got to know what you're talking about. And that's how you kind of move from narrow candidate profile to kind of success profiles, plural, is to have that kind of insight about the work and be able to recommend like, hey, other companies, they're more than just this industry or these companies of your kind of target, for this target profile. I mean, these other organizations do stuff like that as well. And I use stories like that that I've gathered from my experiences to influence other hiring managers and explain, like, you can find great talent in other places. But the more we're there as order taker, the more we hand all of the power over to them and let them just come up with these, crazy must-have lists.
Right. And so some of the work is I need to be in the team meetings. I need to be having conversations with other team members aside from the hiring manager about the culture and the nature of the team and the work to be done. And one of the things that we've heard from recruiters using BrightHire is the opportunity to be a fly on the wall for hiring manager interviews and on-sites gives them insight into what they're testing for and what they're asking and how they're describing the role and the opportunity that they then feel way smarter about and can take back into their sourcing and their screening and their interaction with candidates. And we've had recruiters say, like, this has actually been the biggest benefit to my career growth unexpectedly. But yeah, you got to, if you don't want to just take orders, you have to show up smart.
Yeah, and I would say a below average sourcer when I was a hands-on corporate recruiter and a recruiting leader, way below average at sourcing, but really, really strong at uncovering what it is the business really wanted. And one of my humble brags is, I would do sales ride-alongs. I would go out with our sales team calling on customers to learn what they actually did and what the job was actually like. And I remember I worked at a wireless company before I went to Amazon, and I would go to like mock hearings where they're trying to stick, we're trying to stick cellular towers in people's, communities. And we would go to a mock hearing with a community thing, and I'd learn what these people had to do to influence people to put these towers up. And I sat with the engineering team and I looked at kind of what they were building and how they're building, and I learned to code a little bit. I started reading some of the journals they would read. I started, sending questions out to the leaders like, hey, I read this thing. Is this true for us? Or is this how this works? And one of the best compliments I ever got as a recruiter is this engineer said, I'm confused. Are you the hiring manager or the recruiter? And I was like, oh my God, seriously? Like, say that again. Can I record this? Because my mom is going to be so proud if she thought I actually was an engineer, because I'm not. But to your point, Teddy, I spent time sitting in on interviews and listening and understanding why they asked this and what good sounded like. And I started to bring more of that into my screens, and then eventually into our assessments, and then eventually into kind of our job description and hiring criteria and all that stuff, by just being super curious and leaning in on it. I'm not a good keyword Boolean search constructor. Like, I need to understand the job really well and the work, not just the job, not just the profile, but the work really well. And the better I understand that, the more influence I have with the business.
That's great. All right, we're going to wrap this up with a question that I hesitate to ask, but I have to.
Okay.
What's your favorite interview question?
So my favorite type of interview question is problem-solving questions. I like to give someone something very real. So when I was hiring for TA leaders, for example, when I was a senior TA leader myself and I was hiring for directors or managers, I would often say, hey, the group you're supporting, we need to hire 100 people in 90 days. Build me the plan, walk me through how you would do this. And show the math. Like, I want to see your assumptions in there. And I like to see them kind of work through it. And then I would introduce constraints that would kind of force them to kind of rethink their solution or rethink their approach if we're optimizing for diversity more than speed, or if we're optimizing for senior talent versus junior, or if this is not in the US, but this is actually in Germany, or if this is in Singapore, like what would be different? Or what if it wasn't 100? What if it was 1,000? And I would just start turning all the knobs to see how they could deal with the very real kind of stuff that was going to be thrown at them. I really prefer that over behavioral interview questions, especially in the context of a kind of skills forward kind of approach, which is I think very popular now and much needed. So, not just looking at what you have done, but what you can actually do. And so giving people that maybe even haven't done large scale hiring ramp ups the opportunity to show me how they would do a big hiring ramp up, to me is an example of something that's giving them a fair shot, allowing them to shine if they're good at it, and giving me incredibly useful evidence to use to make the case to hire or not to hire. So I'm a big fan of those kinds of questions with the follow-on questions.
Super, super helpful. John Vlastelica, CEO and founder of Recruiting Toolbox. John, thank you for joining me today. Super fun conversation. I think it'll make for a bunch of good, very tactical sound bites that we can share out with our listeners. Appreciate you investing the time.
Thanks, Teddy. This was fun. Appreciate it.
Awesome. Thanks.